Okay, so we're out here today to tell you guys about this project that's being called Arboretum. And the history of the project is that it used to be a Central Texas blackland prairie forest. And so over on the fence line, you can see oak trees, yopon holly, and a very dense forest that's even hard to move through. There's some mulberry in there, there's some native grapevines, and a bunch of other stuff. But at one point, an engineer bought this 78 acres and decided that they wanted to make it into an olive orchard. And so they bulldozed and burned the native forest, and they put in 2 wells, and they built the infrastructure that they needed, and they started to plant olive trees. And the olive trees are here. When we got the very cold, what's known here in Texas as the snowpocalypse, which probably doesn't seem very cold to anyone who lives north of here, but for us it was a big deal. We froze over for about a week. Power plants were down, water filtration places were down, and so a lot of people actually were in distress during this time. And anyone who planted something like an olive that was on the edge of its growing range, they lost everything at this time. So this was one of those cases. There'd been a lot of time, there'd been a lot of money invested in these olive trees, and they all died back to the ground. Some of them are coming back from the roots, but because it's a grafted plant, it's not going to be true to the kind of olive that was desired to be grown here. But the people who put in the olive orchard decided that they weren't going to try again. They decided to sell. And so that was when one of the existing clients of Symbiosis, whose name is Jason, who you guys are going to meet, decided to purchase this property and turn it into the Arboretum project. The rows on this project are already defined, and because there was a lot of investment in the irrigation system, we're not going to change these rows. So that basically eliminated the discussion or the thought of doing berms and swales or any sort of earthworks on contour, because these rows are not on contour. They're going in whatever direction they're going to have straight lines across this whole 70 acres where there's these 1,000-foot long rows with one road running down the middle and the irrigation main line running on that road. So that was a big difference. Because there'd been a lot of chemical fertilizer and some herbicide, and there'd been a lot of mowing and no animal interaction, and because they were trying to grow a monoculture here, there was a lot of damage to the soil. The soil is good because we're in the blackland prairie, but the soil was not cared for in the way that we would have liked to care for it. So one of the first things we want to do is jumpstart the biological processes that naturally want to occur in a healthy ecosystem, and we want to get those going again. The thing with this is that without animal impact, this wants to become a pioneer recovery forest. And so that's going to look like fast-growing, usually very thorny species are going to come in, and they're going to colonize this, and they're going to grow here for many, many decades. It could be hundreds of years before you start to get more of a climax ecosystem. But even that isn't going to get fully to its greatest expression without apex herbivores and apex predators. And because we don't have those anymore roaming in large herds and being followed by the predators or moved by the predators, that will never come to be. So that's why we have to come in as humans, and we're trying to jump a couple of steps down the line with respect to the ecosystem succession and with understanding it. We're trying to go kind of from grassland, recovery grassland, from a lot of disturbance and a lot of, respectfully mismanagement, in my opinion, working against the ecosystem succession. And we're trying to go from that straight into what would be the greatest expression of the most diverse system of woody plant species that we could get to grow here, and use this site as an example. So we're going to do that by investing in the soil through biochar, worm casting compost, a custom biofertilizer mix. We're going to add some mineral amendments, and we're going to put those at every single point where we plant a tree. And we're planting about 3,000 trees in this phase. In the spring, we planted 750 trees. So that'll bring us up to nearly 4,000 trees planted. And in the spring, the nice thing is, in the spring we got to see, we did more of a minimalistic approach on amendments, and we've actually learned stuff since then, because we're always learning and iterating and trying new things. And so at that point, we didn't have as good of a biofertilizer recipe, we didn't have as good of a source for biochar, And now what we're doing is we're getting the biochar, we're bringing it in, and then we're inoculating it with the biofertilizer and letting that get colonized by the liquid soup of microbes. And because we're gonna put that in with each plant that we put in the ground, we're inoculating the overall area that we're working on that way. Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a fair amount about biochar, but this is basically the secret to some of the healthiest soils in the world. And it's just charcoal inoculated with microbes. And you can think of it like a high rise for microbes. They just have a lot of surface area in there, and they can live in there, and it stores that the energy of nutrients. It can balance the soil. If there's too many nutrients, it can help with that. If there's not enough nutrients, the microbes can help generate it. So just all around, one of the best things you can do. And there's a lot of science coming out now with biochar. And so yeah, we're just kind of on the cutting edge here of soil amendments and experimenting. And so ever since we started using this stuff, the plants have been growing so much faster than before. So we're really seeing the result directly. Worm eggs, so those hatch and the worms come out. But this is almost like it's very spongy, and it can hold a lot of water, but it has every single microbe that you could want in your soil. And so this is like a microbial inoculant. It's also really great for soil structure, and it also has some good nutrients in it. So it's just one of the most balanced, best composts that you can get. So by adding this in with the biochar, we're also helping to inoculate the biochar. And this is, I'm sort of also think of it as like a replacement for like peat moss, which is a pretty unsustainable product to some extent, but this has a very similar soil structuring, water holding capacity, but it also can help create good drainage.
So this is our microbial inoculant. This is what our liquid goodness looks like, you know. This is what we put on all of our trees, plantings, in the soil. Spray as a foliar amendment. It's really powerful. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. And as you can see, it's very much alive.
So this has been a really fun design process, and really it's between Jason, this land, and me and Sam the Fungi. We get to sit together and try to figure out how to take Jason's vision, take the context of the land and where it is now and the resources that we have available, and Sam and I's knowledge and the resources that Symbiosis brings to the table, everything we've learned over 10 years of doing projects in Central Texas. And we get to really go for it with this one. I mean, Jason has been really fun to work with, and he told us, I want you guys to go crazy on this project. I want people to be talking about me, that crazy arboretum guy over there in Hallettsville. And we actually have had to, because I'm always trying to make systems that are gonna work, and I'm trying not to get too far outside of the box, I've had to remind myself of that throughout this design process and be like, well, he said to go crazy, so I really need to try to push the edges here. So that's been a fun challenge, actually. So we've got a lot of different systems going on here. And actually, we've designed the whole thing, but we took out everything that's not either already installed or getting installed right now in fall of 2024. So in spring of 2024, we installed a native privacy hedge, and this was 700-ish trees over here. And we planted those from saplings. So they were all very small trees, and we got some really great data on that as far as process of working with the existing irrigation system and how to retrofit it for new stuff. We got good feedback on what's going to survive through the summer with minimal care, and what weeds are going to come up and try to eat those trees, like morning glory vines, for instance, how the grasshoppers are going to interact. So it was really great to get this project in before we do more, because now we understand what to look out for. All right, so this is the privacy screen. We're screening against the highway here. We're trying to do that very cost effectively, so we planted little whip trees that you can get very inexpensively. We planted them in the spring, so they've went right into summer. It was a little late in the spring, but we had a pretty good year. And as you can see, some of these trees are really struggling through. These are pecans. They've got a lot of grasshopper damage. They've got some heat stress, but it looks like they're gonna pull through, and now we're in the fall, so whatever survived is probably gonna establish now. And then the tree that's really shining the most is the sycamore trees. Some of these sycamore trees are 4, 5, 6 feet tall, and they were really only 12 inches tall when we planted them. So to have grown that much in their first summer is incredible. So those really stand out as a tree that grows very quickly. They do need enough water. Another tree that's doing really well here is the bodart tree. And those are also like the crabapple tree is another common name for them. Really great native Texas tree. And we also planted loblollies and eastern red cedars. We're getting mixed results with those. The eastern red cedars are doing better than the loblolly pines here at this site. and then we planted some oak trees, and it looks like almost all of the oak trees died. So we're trying to figure out why that is so we don't repeat that same mistake in this phase that we're working on right now, where we're planting even more trees, a lot of them oaks.
So, you know, everybody gets excited about planting trees, and they're like, I want more trees in the ground. And the thing about putting trees in the ground is you got to care for them after they're in there. You know, they just don't take care of themselves. You could let them alone, but the likelihood that they're just going to die and all the energy you put into them and care and love, it's not going to come to fruition like it would. So, you know, after we put these about 700 trees in the ground over here, I felt a lot of responsibility for them. I care about these trees. I love them. So coming and checking on them became quite a regular thing. You know, you try to go to sleep at night, and you're laying there tossing and turning. You're like, wait, did I remember to turn the irrigation back on? Do they have enough water? What if an animal came and it tore up the irrigation, and now I gotta go replace something and my trees aren't getting watered? What do I do? But that's just me. But that's the thing, when you put trees in the ground, especially at this level, you gotta take so much time to put into the care of those trees. So if you're thinking about planting hundreds of trees, make sure to budget for time to care for those trees as you move forward, because I tell you what, they'll benefit from a little bit more of your love and attention.
So this is a cool fence that Jason set up here, and it's to keep the deer out. There's not a ton of deer pressure here. It's not as bad as in the hill country, but you can see the deer don't have good depth perception. So around some perimeter parts of the property, there's an 8-foot tall fence, and this is an alternative to that, where you set the fence about 3 feet apart, and he's just got 2 hot wires running here, and the deer come up to this and they can't tell if they can jump over it or not successfully. So this has actually been pretty good at keeping the deer off of these trees that we've planted here. And then also in the spring, we planted this live oak privacy screen hedge here, and we used bigger trees for that. And now we're gonna be planting in fall of 2024, switchgrass. And switchgrass is a native grass. It's a bunch grass that grows 6 feet tall. And so that's gonna fill in the privacy screen from that road there. There's an oil pumping station across the way. And so part of the goal is to just screen that from view so that when you're in the arboretum property, you're in it and you're not looking out at other people's infrastructure. So moving down from there, this is the Savannah Food Park. So it's more spread out. It's a mix of native trees and edible trees. And this is one of the places where we're pushing some edges, where we're planting some things that you know, are a little bit more experimental, that don't have the highest success rate, but they're gonna receive more care because they're closer and they're sort of between where you come and go. There's gonna be a main road going through it. But this is a place where people can just walk through and see more of a savanna style ecosystem that's curated for human function, need, consumption, right? And then over here in this system, this is the syntropic agroforestry system. And so this is where a lot of our trees are gonna go, and this will also expand over this way. And the goal here is to leave these 12-foot laneways, and then there's 3 rows of trees, and they're spaced 6 feet apart. So they're very densely planted in that regard. And then we're gonna have sort of a grid pattern here. So they're gonna be tight, and you're gonna have to prune that, which is the syntropic system, and chop and drop that material and then feed it to the fungi. And so that way you're building your soil from biomass that's grown here on site, and you're also training the trees to grow up faster. Then underneath that, you can come in and you can plant an annual crop, whether that's something that you harvest for hay or whether that's something that you harvest and bring to like a farmer's market. That's up to Jason to decide.
Hey everybody. So this is our tree planter that we get to use for this awesome job. You know, we have these whips, which are basically just these root balls that have, you know, our trees growing out of them, but you can see they're really small. So digging these in by hand, you know, we can do it, but it takes quite a lot of time. But this machine just speeds that up. So in the front here, we have this large metal disc, and this disc, it splits the ground and it cuts any of the long grass that could be in our way for our trench. And then we have our trencher right here that digs into the ground, splits open the soil, and creates an opening. And this is the opening that's held. So as we move down this line, we have a little pocket of space that then we can, you know, put our root ball right into. We can slide it down into this space and it'll plant itself with these tires.
At the top, yeah.
Because as it moves, the tires will push the soil around the base of the tree and then we'll be good to go. The tree is in the ground. And that's basically how this works. It's a really cool device. We got 2 people sitting on it. One person is usually the tree master and the other person is the integrator. So the tree master is the one who picks out all the trees, makes sure the order is correct, and then the integrator is the one who marries the tree into the soil and makes sure that the tree is upright, that it's deep enough, not too deep, not too shallow, and makes a mental note if anything needs to be adjusted when they walk up the line after we finish. So it's an awesome tool. It's a great device to use out here, especially because we have got lots of different soil types. We've got sandy loam, we've got clay, we've got a mix of both in some areas. So this tool has sped up our process by a lot.
DJ.
So this thing here is a really cool device that was, you know, contrived by one of the first owner of this place. You know, he needed to unspool a lot of this irrigation. It's cumbersome, and as you can see, it's kind of hard to work with. There's pieces that, you know, get tangled up really easily. So this device essentially helps us move out our irrigation, get it where it needs to go without us having to hand roll this. Because normally what we would be doing is we'd have a roll like that we would be someone would be walking and we would be doing this for that whole row. And these are 880 feet. So that would be a lot of hand work. So any bit of machinery we can use to make the efficiency go up out here, and from this wheel to those wheels to those wheels, we're all about the wheels out here. Going back to this syntropic agroforestry, what's really unique about that system too on this property is that there's already existing olive trees in that space. So what we're going to do is integrate the olive trees into our agroforestry syntropic system, so we can potentially bring back and maintain the olives that are here. You know, we don't want to just completely bulldoze the plan of the previous owner when they're still living trees. So I think that's going to be really exciting to see that interaction between the olives and other plants, because now we've seen what olives monocropped looks like. Doesn't do too good. Let's see what olives in a guild looks like.
Now, moving down here, this is where we have a lot of experience. This is the dense food forest. So we've got pecans, mulberries, and then we've got all the other fruit that will grow in Texas that's a little bit shorter and smaller. The pecans and mulberries are more of like the overstory plants. And then we've got things like figs, pomegranates, Asian pears, plums, and we've also got elderberries, we've got blackberries, we've got nitrogen fixing trees like kidneywood and Texas redbud in the understory, false indigo. And so this is going to be more like a traditional 7-layer permaculture food forest here, but they're still planted on these straight rows because we're utilizing the irrigation and we want to have access for management going through here. And then you could also run like a chicken tractor through there. So if you wanted to have chickens going into the food forest, cleaning up any fruit that's falling on the ground, breaking the pest cycle, and producing eggs and meat birds, you could do that in this food forest. As you can see on the design plan, in this dense food forest, there's 2 different planting configurations. So in row 1 up here, there's 1 planting configuration, and then this is row 2 where we have a different planting configuration where things are a little bit more spread out, a little bit more open, but eventually the pecans are gonna get big and they're gonna spread out, and they're actually gonna start to provide shelter to the rows in between them. And we did it partly this way because we wanted to experiment with different methods and see what works best and see what feels good to interact with and to manage. And then also because we wanted to leave these lanes open in between the rows for grazing animals through, for planting cover crops, so you can run cattle through here, and then you can follow them with smaller animals like sheep and goats, and then follow those with chickens, and really maximize the nutrient cycling and get the soil to build itself up very quickly that way. So some of the plants in this row, we've got the pecans as the native overstory. These are actually grafted pecans, so they will produce viable, desirable nuts. I've got these elderberries, really fast growing native plant, easy to propagate. You can just take cuttings and stick them in the ground and those will mostly root out. Really great medicinal value. Don't eat those raw though. And then we've also got, over here, we've got crab apples. So apples are pretty tough to grow in Texas. And so we're trying crab apples down here. We have Eve's necklace, Arroyo sweetwood, and false indigo as some of our nitrogen fixtures. We also have a Texas redbud native tree right here. And then what are some of the other fruit trees we have here? I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's more fruit trees down the line. Oh, and of course we've got the K-line irrigation system running. So this is a mobile sprinkler system. You can drag it around a whole property so you don't have to put in an irrigation system across a whole ranch. And the idea here is you graze your animals through, rotationally graze your animals, and then you water after you graze. And that way it starts the recovery cycle. And as you wait for 60 or 80 or 90 days or whatever your recovery cycle is, you're gonna have maximum growth benefit. Of course, if it's raining, you don't need to do that. And so we've planted a cover crop here in these rows, and now we're watering it with the K-line until it comes up. Of course, it's also overspraying into the food forest, which is great. And we might get some rain here, but it hasn't rained for a month. So all the green that you see out here is actually just from us being able to irrigate. Luckily, we're on a very strong well. I believe it's the Carrizo-Wilcox aquifer out here, which is one of the best aquifers in Texas. So it's not in danger of being depleted right now. And over time, once the system is established, we're gonna be able to stop irrigating it, and we're gonna be able to actually let this system help recharge the local water table and aquifer. This part of the project is meant to be like a permaculture classic 7-layer food forestry. You've got your overstory trees. In this case, that's pecan. And so those are kind of the bones, the structure of the system. And then you've got your mid-story trees. In this case, that's things like mulberry, pear, Asian pear. You've got your understory trees like plums, peaches, loquats, figs, pomegranates, trees that naturally stay lower, and we can also prune them to be lower. And then we've also got our nitrogen fixing, and our other shrub layers are, so for the nitrogen fixing, we're using kidney wood. We also mixed in some Texas sage, and that's partly for pollinator benefit and just for biodiversity. We've also got thornless blackberries and elderberries in the shrub layer. So this overall system is, they're 500-foot rows, and there's 15 of those rows. So it's, what's that, 7,500 linear feet of rows. The plants are about 6 feet apart. So we've got the trees 15 feet apart, and then we've got shrubs in between them. So when you average it out, there's 2 shrubs for every tree. The plants end up about, the rows are 6 feet apart, and then the trees are on a grid pattern so that we let enough light in, and so that we also eventually create shade and really model this system after what you would see just in a natural forest. So we want to make it more productive, and we want to push the timeline. We want to make it happen faster. We're jump-starting the natural systems of soil building, biodiversity, and then we're also selecting the plants that are going to be most enjoyable for us to interact with, that are going to produce the fruit that we find the most delicious, but also still provide benefit to the ecosystem and provide ecosystem services to the whole area around us. So one thing that I think is interesting about this system is the rows run north to south. And so the sun tracks up from the east, comes overhead, and then it sets in the west over here. And so what we've done is we've put faster growing trees that like more sun on the western side. And so those trees are going to grow up faster, and they're going to provide some shade and some shelter. And then in the middle row, besides the mulberries that are going to grow fast and provide shade and shelter to the whole system, we've put trees that are able to stay a little bit shorter and be underneath the mulberries that are going to benefit from shade on both sides and also from this center row. And then on the eastern side, we've put our shortest trees and trees that can tolerate plenty of sun, but that aren't going to suffer as the system grows in and gets a little bit more shade. for irrigation, we have an irrigation main line that runs along the road up there, and we're just using 3/4 inch poly tubing. This was actually all here when this was an olive orchard, and there were emitters about every 7 feet. And so in a lot of cases, we were able to just use the same emitter or just use the same hole and replace the emitter. And if you know, we got off and there's no emitter where we're planting, we just went ahead and popped a new one in there. So there are some emitters on this irrigation system that don't have a perennial plant at them, but we're also planting native grasses and wildflowers and other beneficial things. Actually, I'm seeing one right now. There's a milkweed right here. It's great for the monarch butterflies. So we didn't plant this, but this milkweed is here, and there's an open emitter, right? So that's kind of just an example of what's going to be happening here in this system. So then that'll produce seed, and that'll spread as an understory beneficial native. I believe there's also medicinal. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure there's medicinal properties to this plant as well. So this is a food forest. It's a biodiversity node and hub that's going to spread into the whole ecosystem, but it's also a medicine forest because every single plant has medicinal value as well. And so even when we're not in a fruiting season, you can go and you can harvest leaves, you can harvest roots, you can harvest bark, and you can make medicine from these systems as well. All right, so there's 818 individual plants, and we're trying to plant this efficiently so that we don't, you know, waste the time and energy and money of our clients here. So we're always trying to refine our methods. And so what we did was we came through with the skid steer and we used an auger bit to punch the holes for the bigger trees. And then we put in our amendments, and then we planted those trees, got them on irrigation. And then we came through, and for the smaller trees, we just used trenching shovels or sharpshooter shovels to plant all of the 1-gallon shrubs. And then we got all of those on irrigation. And then we've put down our myco mulch to help them settle in. And we're gonna come back and we're gonna mulch those heavier once we're done with planting all the other trees on the project.
So with these mulch piles that we have right here, we did something pretty unique, you know, being Sam the Fun guy and all. I wanted to increase the biology of this, like the movement of microbes in these piles. So what we did is we layered in a bunch of mycelium in here, spent mycelium blocks from local mushroom farms, and it started to eat and inoculate this mulch pile. Can't really see it very well, but there's some mycelium growing in here, you know, down in here, that it's starting to degrade this mulch pile into soil. But what we're doing with this is there are massive 24-yard mulch piles. I think there's like 3 of them on the other side of the property. So we're taking this mulch, which has got all that saprophytic mycelial decomposition happening, and we're putting that down on top of our biochar amendments, which have been inoculated with bacteria and microbes. So, you know, we have this bacteria, microbes with this heavy fungal component with fresh wood chips on top. So we're essentially just making a life lasagna with the soil here. And theoretically, you know, this is going to inoculate the soil with that saprophytic breakdown of the wood. It's going to break down the extra wood chips that we have on there, and then the microbes and the fungus are going to form a symbiotic relationship and work together in the soil to boost the immunity as well as the nutrient profile available to any plant nearby.
I'm really excited about this. This is a replication of the syntropic agroforestry system as far as what we're doing with the rows of trees and what kind of trees we're planting, but we're spacing them further apart. And so this is going to be where you can graze cattle in between these rows of trees. So it's more of a silvopasture rotational grazing system. And then you could follow those cattle with smaller animals. So you could have a leader follower system like Joel Salatin promotes and is very successful with here. And you'd have plenty of room to move those cattle through. So I feel like that's where we're going to get to see everything working in unison. And that really excites me because I think once you add the animals into it, then you get this exponential result, because we're trying to model our systems after ecosystems, and ecosystems do not exist without that animal impact. But because, as I was saying earlier, we don't have the big herds and we don't have the apex predators, we have to be the ones to move those herds through in an intentional way. But when you do that, you get this soil building effect and you get to bring back the native perennial grasses. And then of course you get to produce really high quality meat as well. All right, hey, thanks guys. Appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, you can hop over to our website. There's tons of good articles. You can join our newsletter. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. We'd love to see you there and answer your questions. Thanks again. Enjoy.